the landscape of an industrial heartland that once bestrode the world. But a region that fell on tough times, and a people who felt forgotten. Now they are redrawing Britain's political map. The Tees Valley was the first part of Labour's Red Wall to crumble into Tory hands. And today, payback, as Boris Johnson unveiled plans he claims will help deliver on his promise to rejuvenate those areas.
Boris Johnson first made his name in politics a world away from here, in the genteel parliamentary constituency of Henley, and then as mayor of our booming capital city. But Brexit introduced him to a world that felt left behind, and today's Queen's speech is targeted with laser precision at the Tories' newest recruits. Red meat for the Red Wall, one government source told me.
In all, there are 30 bills with 3 core themes for the Red Wall. We see the first signs of how the government will use a new post-Brexit state aid regime to help industry, plus bills to establish a new generation of free ports, including one here in Teesside. There's a sentencing and police bill and a bill to reduce the number of asylum seekers crossing the Channel. Necessary measures, say the government. Culture war traps for Labour, say critics. And for the forgotten 50% of the population who do not go to university, there will be a government guarantee of training for all adults without the equivalent of A-levels. In the factory that makes 40% of Britain's brake pads, a warm welcome for today's announcements.
I think what we're hearing so far, certainly with the proposals on the adult education, can only be seen as a positive. When you look at the demographic in areas such as Hartlepool, there's not a lot of people that have had further education. So having funding available where people are then able to go and get further education and enhance their skills, certainly with the ambition to try and pull more highly technical jobs into the region, can only be seen as a positive from our perspective.
Scepticism back in Westminster.
So today we needed a Queen's speech that rose to the scale of the moment, that rewarded the sacrifices of the last year and rebuilt the foundations. But instead, this Queen's speech merely papers over the cracks. It's packed with short-term gimmicks and distant promises. This government's never short of those. But it misses the urgency and the scale of the transformation that's needed.
We now come to the Prime Minister.
And the purpose of this Queen's speech is to take this country forward with superb infrastructure, £640 billion, I can tell the right honourable opposite, with a new focus on skills, on technology, on gigabit broadband, and by fighting crime, by being tough on crime, by investing in our great public services, above all our NHS, by helping millions of people to realise the dream of home ownership. We intend to unite and level up across the whole of our United Kingdom.
Back in Middlesbrough, a mixed reaction.
I think it's really positive, and I think with the Red Car Works that's happening as well and the new Freeport status happening in the area, the levelling up agenda, in my opinion, with the government is working really well, and actually we're starting to see it.
I just don't trust Boris Johnson. This year he's said a lot of stuff, but he hasn't followed through with it. That's just my own opinion.
It's good for this area, actually. So, and I'm happy anyway. So, I think the Conservatives, they're going to stay in.
There are large pools of goodwill towards Boris Johnson in Teesside, though that does have its limits here in Middlesbrough, which is still a safe Labour seat. And in time, the Prime Minister will need to show that his ideas can be sustained. Some of our new trading partners want to cut across the new free ports. And for just how long will the Chancellor sustain high levels of spending?
The brilliant thing about levelling up is there are no metrics by which we can actually judge if it's going to be a success. How many jobs is it going to create, whether it's going to improve transport spending per head, and there's been huge disparity on that over decades, or whether it's going to improve life expectancy, for example, which is 3 years nearly different between the north and the south. So all those things, and we're beginning now to see whether this agenda is achievable.
Such a perfect day.
A sentiment that will echo with Britain's boosterish Prime Minister. But Boris Johnson has made grand promises to a region with deep challenges. He knows he has to deliver.
Nick Watt there, and he was reporting from Teesside. He's right here now to take us through some of the other areas of the legislative agenda that are making waves. First, tell us about the things that aren't in the speech.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, Emily, social care was technically there, but blink and you'd have missed this.
Proposals on social care reform will be brought forward.
Now, that was rather more modest language, and don't forget that it's the government that writes the Queen's speech, rather more modest language than the full-throated intervention by the Prime Minister when he became Prime Minister back in July 2019.
And so I am announcing now, on the steps of Downing Street, that we will fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan we have prepared.
So what is the hold-up? Well, there are two core issues. Social care is one of those classic things that an incoming Prime Minister says amid great fanfare, I'm going to fix this, and then they find that it is fiendishly complicated. And the second thing is there are some very difficult conversations currently going on within government.
Nick, what about the things that are controversial, that were in there?
Well, there are two sort of core big issues that are upsetting MPs on sort of either side of the House. So amongst Shire Tories, deep alarm over government plans to loosen planning restrictions, planning laws, and that will mean they will aim, but by the middle of this decade, you'll be building 300,000 houses a year rather than the current 200,000. One Tory MP said to me, there's real trouble in the Shires. Now, obviously, we focus on the red wall Tories, but don't forget those Shire Tories, they have the numbers and they could cause real trouble if they wanted to. And then from the left and from libertarian Conservatives, real concerns over that government plan to legislate to mean that you will have to produce photographic ID in order to vote. So let's just hear from the former Labour Home Office Minister, Meg Hillier.
We need to see a proper, coherent approach to this, not an approach that just stops the poorest from voting, that cuts people out of actually exercising their basic democratic right when the percentage of in-person fraud is minuscule.
Now, Meg Hillier was the identity card minister in the last Labour government in the years when you had an identity card minister, and she said that they legislated to ensure that you would not need to produce an ID card to access any public service.
Thanks very much, Nick. We'll be speaking to the government in a moment. Joining us first, Cat Smith, Shadow Secretary of State for Young People and Democracy. Cat Smith, what would Labour have done differently today? Does the levelling up agenda pretty much mirror Labour's priorities?
Emily, this Queen's speech really highlighted was the difference between what was included in that Queen's speech and what was omitted from that Queen's speech. And I think that contrast between social care, where in 22 months since Boris Johnson claimed that he had a plan for social care ready to go, and we have nothing on that today, compared to the huge focus on making it more difficult for voters to be able to take part in our democracy, to cast their vote elections, says to me this is a government who got their priorities entirely mixed and wrong. We know that the Tories haven't got a plan, a real plan for Britain, and to those long-term problems.
Well, okay, Kat, we're having a few problems with your line, but we'll stick with you. Keir Starmer, your leader, said the lack of social care plan was unforgivable. His words in the Commons today. What is Labour's plan then?
Apologies for the House Commons broadband internet system tonight. Basically, if you neglect the infrastructure of your country, like your physical infrastructure, your roads, you get the potholes. And we should be looking at social care as our social infrastructure, holds our economy together, and it should be given that level of priority. So what we're calling for is a 10-year plan of investment and reform to really transform that sort for older and disabled people, as part of actually our wider ambitions to make Britain the best country in which to grow up and to grow old. So our priorities for a care system is one that puts home first by shifting support towards prevention and early help.
So just tell us that 10-year plan, and who is paying for that? At the moment, anyone with assets of more than 23,000 has to pay the full cost of their care. Is that the right limit? Would you be taxing? Would you be making it insurance? Would it be universal?
I can't put any figures on that tonight, Emily. I think if the focus is on the cap on care costs, it's not really looking at the full solution to the crisis that is in social care. Selling your home to pay care isn't the issue for working age adults with disabilities, and they make 1/3 of users of social care. It does nothing to address the 1.5 million elderly people who need help with, getting up, getting washed, dressed, fed, and currently receive absolutely no help at all. And it certainly gives no extra help to unpaid family carers who are being pushed to breaking point, trying to look after their loved ones. And all of these things have really been highlighted in the last 12 months of the COVID pandemic.
So would you work with the government on this? Because Boris Johnson said today that he asked Labour to join forces on a social care plan.
There's been no reach out from the government to Labour to work together on this, but we did take part in the original deal not proposal talks, and Liz Kendall, who is our social care minister, is keen to work with the government where we can find solutions that mean that no one's going to be losing their entire life savings to pay for care.
Kat Smith, let me ask about the first point you made, which was about voter ID and the constitutional changes. What is your fear about making people take more ID with them? Do you think it will hurt the Labour vote?
My fear is that it's going to lock millions of people out of our democracy, and in particular elderly, low-income, Black, Asian and ethnic minority voters, less likely to have the forms of photo ID that we're hearing talked about today. My fear is that it's completely disproportionate to the problem. So 2019, 59 million people cast votes in those elections, and that led to one conviction for the kind of fraud impersonating someone at a polling station. Just to put that in context, you're more likely to get struck by lightning 3 times, and this is a scheme that's going to cost millions of pounds, which should frankly be spent on things like social care. It's not an issue.
Kat Smith, we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's go straight to Gillian Keegan now, the Government's Minister for Skills. And I know you've had a long day, Gillian. Appreciate you being with us. We've heard a lot from your government about levelling up, and I guess the simplest and most effective way to increase the wages of underpaid workers is how you level up. I mean, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation was saying that 1 in 8 workers are living in poverty. They were expecting an employment bill to deliver better quality work and to protect workers' rights. That's a really simple way of levelling up.
The very best way to level up is to give people the skills so that they can earn more and get better jobs. And really the levelling up, what we've recognised is that talent is all over the country, but the opportunities are not. And certainly I recognise that from my own upbringing in a Knowsley Comprehensive School, and many people who left school without the GCSEs that you need to get on in life. And that really does trap you in lower pay. So what we've said today is if you're a young person and you're looking to get into more technical vocational routes, have fantastic routes into brilliant careers where there's lots of skill shortages, then we're going to help you do that. But likewise, if you're an older person, if you missed out on that first opportunity, or the skills that you've got are maybe not the ones that are going to be needed in the future, then the Prime Minister has offered a lifetime skills guarantee that will be available all over the country. So you can learn where you are, and also the investment obviously is a key part of that in terms of...
One of the other things that traps you, of course, is the social care workers, the unpaid army of social care volunteers, which is nearly 9 million, who are currently paid an allowance of £67. It does seem extraordinary that after a year of this devastating pandemic, your legislative priorities afforded 9 words of the Queen's speech to social care and to all those people who work for free to go about doing that job in the place of your plan.
Well, it's not quite right to say it was just 9 words, because we have the health and social care bill as well, which is looking at the first stage, which is actually integrating health and social care. What the pandemic has taught us is how important it is that those two work really closely together.
You should have known that. You should have known that, because the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street 2 years ago and he promised the plan was ready to go. You've been in power 11 years. This was promised by David Cameron, by Theresa May, by Boris Johnson most recently. We've had a plan by Damien Green. We've had Andrew Dilnot offering a comprehensive social care plan a decade ago. Where is it?
Well, I mean, there's been lots of plans over successive governments, actually for decades, you're quite right. In terms of the Prime Minister, he stood up in July and said he was going to bring forward a plan. Obviously, since then, he's had to wrestle with a gridlock parliament, he's had to have a general election, and then, of course, we've been wrestling with the pandemic.
Last year was a gridlock parliament. It wasn't, he won a majority.
From July until December, it was a gridlock parliament. He made that speech in July, and then obviously we came back in December, and then not long after that we had the pandemic. But we have committed to bring forward, it is important, and it is important for all the reasons that you say.
Honestly, Gillian, it makes no sense.
Every single one.
It just makes no sense.
We are bringing forward a plan at the end. I just want to finish so that you know what we're planning on doing. Bringing forward a plan at the end of the year. We do very much hope to work cross-party, because it has also been used as a political football, and we've seen that in the past. Right. You mentioned previous prime ministers. That has happened in the past.
Let's just
like to avoid that.
Let's talk about that, because the promise was that he had a plan ready to go in July 2019. So that clearly was not true. He said that he had reached out to Labour. You've just heard them directly deny that. So in terms of political football, maybe that's a little bit rich. Last time, we remember...
I think that's an opportunity. If they're saying that they're ready to work with us, and we're saying we want to work together, perfect. We'll work together. We know what all the parameters of the plan are. You're quite right. There's been many different reviews offering many different systems and a combination of systems. But
11 years you've had to get this right.
Well, I've probably been over more like 20 or 30, to be honest. And I think most people don't even know what the current system is. And certainly I think we saw that in the 2017 election. It is important, and we will bring forward a plan. But we want to get it right, and we want to get it right once and for all. Every single one of us is impacted by this. Our own elderly one, our own elderly people, our own loved ones. Everybody has got this uncertainty.
Do you know,
we do need to solve it.
I get that you want to get it right and that everything needs time, but it does seem extraordinary that we've got those 9 words on social care today, yet quadruple that on constitutional change. Now, tell me about the people's priorities, because when you were knocking on doors, did people tell you that they were fed up of the fixed-term parliament, or did they tell you that they really needed to limit the power of the courts, or were they annoyed that they didn't have to take photographic ID to the polls? Just explain that as your priority right now.
Well, if you're knocking on doors in December 2019, people were fed up of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. They were fed up of a gridlock parliament. They were fed up of watching Parliament just the casting.
So how does voter ID at the polls? How does that solve that?
So, well, that's about the Fixed Term Parliament Act. In terms of voter ID at the polls, there have been a number of election court judgments, particularly Tower Hamlets.
There was one conviction in 2019, and the reason we know about Tower Hamlets is because it was caught out and it became a big story and a big headline once. One man stopped.
And then there was a report in 2016 by Lord Pickles, which basically said it exposed vulnerability in our system. Now, anytime you look at a system, it's clear to me that there is vulnerability in our system. If you don't have to show your ID, which you don't at the moment, anybody could actually walk in and say they're you. And it's important that your vote is yours. This is too important to get wrong.
Gillian, UK data shows, I'm just going to put it in perspective for our viewers, because the UK data shows there is a 0.00001% of fraudulent votes. We just heard it is more likely you'll be struck by lightning 3 times.
To be honest, you don't actually know that. What you're saying,
I'm just quoting UK data.
The one case that has been proven, but there's many times you may not prove, and it's very difficult to prove. But we do know our system has an exposed vulnerability, and it's too important. Our democratic system is too important. So for the sake of doing something, which is basically what most people do every day for everyday transactions, which is showing photo ID, we believe that our system is important. Okay. It's too important to keep
when you say it's too important, there are many who hear the concern that it will disproportionately impact the young, the ethnically diverse, the voter hasn't got a fixed address or doesn't have the time in a very full, exhausting day to take on more bits of admin, that it will deter the very people who vote for your opponents. This is what it looks like.
No, that's definitely not true. And to be honest, most young people need ID in a bar nowadays. photo ID. And most
you might as well invite them in and give them a vote too then when they're 16. I mean, doesn't that include...
Well, you need photo ID to do many things, and it's 18 that you can go into a bar. So there's many areas in life that you need photo ID. And what we're saying is this is an area that has an exposed vulnerability. We've seen weaknesses, we've seen some election court judgments, and we just can see that there is a vulnerability here. And most people would prefer to protect the integrity of our democratic system by using something which has now become quite everyday.
Okay,
and
Gillian, Keegan.
If you don't have photo ID, then what we said, for those people who don't have various photo ID, then you can get photo ID.
You heard what Meg Hillier says. She says it stops the poorest voting most. We've got to wrap there, but thank you for your time this evening.